The morning sunlight streamed through the windows of the small white church in Carson City, Nevada, and Penelope Norris could hear the murmur of voices filling the pews behind her. But all she could see was the empty doorway where Thomas should have been standing 20 minutes ago. She stood in the tiny back room, her hands trembling as they clutched the bouquet of wildflowers her younger sister had gathered from the meadow beyond town. The lace dress had taken her mother 3 months to sew, every stitch made with love and hope for this day. Now those stitches felt like they were tightening around her chest, making it hard to breathe. "He will be here," her mother whispered, adjusting the veil for the third time, but Penelope could hear the doubt creeping into her voice. "Thomas is just running late. You know how men can be." But Penelope knew. Deep in her bones, she knew. Thomas had been growing distant for weeks, ever since his childhood sweetheart had returned to Carson City from San Francisco. She had ignored the signs, convinced herself that a man did not ask a woman to marry him unless he meant it. She had been wrong. The Reverend appeared in the doorway, his weathered face creased with concern. "Miss Norris, it has been nearly half an hour. Perhaps we should." "Give him 5 more minutes," Penelope said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Please." Those 5 minutes stretched like an eternity. She could hear people shifting in their seats, the whispers growing louder. Her father had spent his last dollars on the reception food waiting back at their small ranch. Her mother had invited everyone they knew. The humiliation of this moment was bad enough in private, but in front of the entire town, it felt like her soul was being laid bare for everyone to judge. When the 5 minutes ended, Penelope made a decision. She would not hide. She would not let Thomas turn her into a ghost story, the girl who waited in the back room while her groom never came. She would face this with whatever dignity she had left. "I will tell them," she said quietly, lifting her chin. Her mother gasped. "Penelope, you cannot. Let your father." "No." Penelope touched her mother's hand gently. "This is happening to me. I will face it." She walked through the doorway and down the short aisle to where Reverend Thompson stood. Every eye in the church turned to her. The whispers stopped, replaced by a heavy, suffocating silence. She could see Mrs. Henderson in the 3rd row, her face a mixture of pity and barely concealed satisfaction at having fresh gossip. She could see the Miller boys trying not to stare. She could see her best friend Clara with tears already streaming down her face. Penelope reached the front of the church and turned to face the congregation. Her voice came out clear, though it cost her everything to keep it that way. "Thank you all for coming today. It appears that Thomas has decided not to attend his own wedding. I apologize for wasting your time." The whispers erupted like a disturbed beehive. She saw her father start to rise from his seat, his face red with anger and embarrassment. But before she could take a step back down the aisle, before she could flee this nightmare, a voice rang out from the back of the church. "I will stand there instead." Every head turned. Penelope's heart hammered against her ribs as she looked toward the entrance. A man stood in the doorway, backlit by the bright Nevada sun so that for a moment he seemed more shadow than substance. Then he stepped forward, and she could see him clearly. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that filled out his dark coat. His hair was the color of wheat just before harvest, slightly too long and curling at his collar. He wore traveling clothes, dusty from the road, and a gun belt sat low on his hips. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, even from this distance. They were a startling blue, the color of the sky after a storm has cleared. The stranger walked down the aisle with the confident stride of a man who knew exactly what he was doing, though Penelope could not fathom what that might be. He stopped beside her, and she caught the scent of leather and sage and something else, something clean like mountain air. "I do not know you," Penelope managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "No, madam, you do not." He turned those blue eyes on her, and she saw something in them that made her breath catch. Not pity. Not the horrible, soul-crushing pity she had seen in every other face. Instead, she saw understanding, and beneath that, a bone-deep kindness. "But I know what it is like to be left behind by someone who made promises. And I know that you deserve better than to have this be the story people tell about you." Reverend Thompson cleared his throat. "Young man, I appreciate the gesture, but marriage is not something to be entered into lightly. You cannot simply—" "I am serious, Reverend." The stranger looked at the older man with steady respect. "If the lady is willing, I will stand here and speak vows with her. We can sort out the details later, but right now, she needs someone to stand beside her, and I am volunteering." Penelope's mind raced. This was insane. This was a man she had never seen before in her life. She should say no, should send him away, should just accept the humiliation and move on with her life. But even as those thoughts formed, others pushed through. Her father's debt. The money he had borrowed to pay for this wedding and the reception, money he did not have, money he could not pay back. The looks she would get for months, maybe years. The pity. The gossip. The way Thomas's betrayal would define her, and this stranger's eyes. There was something in them that called to a wild part of her soul she had not known existed. "Why would you do this?" she asked. He smiled then, and it transformed his whole face, making him handsome in a rugged, unexpected way. "Maybe I believe in rescuing people who need rescuing. Maybe I am tired of seeing good people get hurt by those who do not deserve them. Or maybe I just think you look far too pretty in that dress to waste it." Despite everything, despite the absolute madness of this moment, Penelope felt a laugh bubble up in her chest. It came out shaky but real. The congregation was in an uproar now, voices rising as people debated what was happening. Her father had reached the front of the church. "Penelope, you do not have to do this," he said urgently. "We will be fine. Do not marry a stranger out of—" "Out of what, Papa?" She looked at her father, seeing the worry in his eyes, but also the debt, the shame, the anger at Thomas for putting them in this position. "Out of pride, desperation. Maybe those are not the best reasons, but they are reasons nonetheless. And at least this way, the story has a different ending." She turned back to the stranger. "I do not even know your name. Asher Price." He said it simply, then added, "I am 26. I have a small ranch about 30 miles north of here, and I promise you I am not running from the law or a wife or anything else that would make this worse for you than it already is." "Penelope Norris," she replied, though he likely already knew that. "I am 22, I can read and write and handle a rifle, and I have never done anything this crazy in my entire life." "Then maybe it is time you did." Asher held out his hand to her. Penelope looked at that outstretched hand for a long moment. She could hear her mother crying softly in the front pew. She could feel the weight of 100 eyes watching her, waiting to see what the jilted bride would do. And she could feel something stirring inside her, something that had been sleeping for too long. A desire for something more than the safe, predictable life she had planned with Thomas. A hunger for adventure, for risk, for a different story than the one that had been written for her. She took Asher Price's hand. His fingers closed around hers, warm and calloused and steady. He led her to stand directly in front of Reverend Thompson, who looked thoroughly flustered but also, if Penelope was reading him right, a little bit impressed. "Reverend, if you would," Asher said politely. "This is highly irregular," the Reverend muttered, but he opened his Bible. "I suppose if both parties are willing and of sound mind, though I question that last part." Someone in the congregation laughed, breaking some of the tension. Penelope recognized old Mr. Foster, who had fought in the war and had strong opinions about people making their own choices. "Get on with it, Reverend," Mr. Foster called out. "The lady has decided. Let her have this much at least." Reverend Thompson sighed but began the ceremony. The words washed over Penelope in a strange dream like haze. This morning she had woken up expecting to marry Thomas, a man she had known since childhood, a man she had thought she loved. Now she stood beside a complete stranger, speaking vows that should have meant everything but instead felt like an act in a play she had not rehearsed for. "Do you, Asher Price, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Reverend Thompson asked. "I do." Asher's voice was firm, no hesitation. "And do you, Penelope Norris, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Penelope opened her mouth, and for a terrifying second nothing came out. Then she felt Asher's thumb brush gently across her knuckles, a small gesture of reassurance, and she found her voice. "I do." "Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Nevada, I pronounce you husband and wife." Reverend Thompson snapped his Bible shut with more force than necessary. "God help you both." Asher turned to Penelope, those blue eyes searching hers. "May I kiss you, for appearance's sake?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. He leaned down, and his lips touched hers so gently it was barely a kiss at all, just a whisper of contact that somehow sent warmth flooding through her entire body. Then he straightened, squeezed her hand once more, and turned to face the congregation. The church erupted. Some people were clapping, caught up in the sheer audacity of what had just happened. Others were talking loudly, already spinning this story into something they could tell for years to come. Penelope's mother had buried her face in her hands, though whether she was crying from relief or horror, Penelope could not tell. Her father looked stunned, like he had been hit over the head with a 2x4. "Well, Mrs. Price," Asher said, and it took Penelope a moment to realize he was talking to her. That was her name now. "Shall we go to this reception I heard mentioned?" "You do not have to," Penelope said quickly. "You have done enough. More than enough. We can have this annulled tomorrow and no one will." "Penelope." He said her name with a careful deliberation that made her stop talking. "I do not do things halfway. I stood up here and spoke vows, and I meant them. Maybe not in the way you expected to mean them when you woke up this morning, but I meant them nonetheless. So let us go to your reception, and let us eat the food your father paid for, and let us give everyone a good show. Then tonight, you and I will sit down and figure out what happens next. Does that sound fair?" It did not sound fair. It sounded impossible and overwhelming and utterly insane. But it also sounded like the only path forward that did not end with her crumbling into 1,000 pieces right here on the church floor. "Fair," she agreed. They walked back down the aisle together, and Penelope kept her head high even though she could feel tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. She would not cry, not here, not in front of all these people. She had already given them enough of a show. The reception was held at the Norris Ranch, a modest spread with a small house and a barn that had seen better days. Tables had been set up outside, covered with white cloths that Penelope and her mother had washed and pressed 3 times to get them perfect. The food that should have been a celebration now felt like evidence of how much her father had sacrificed for a wedding that had gone completely sideways. But Asher played his part beautifully. He shook hands with the men, complimented the women, and stayed close to Penelope's side without being overbearing. He ate the food with genuine appreciation and listened when people talked to him. Slowly, impossibly, the atmosphere began to shift from shocked gossip to something almost festive. "You are good at this," Penelope murmured to him when they had a moment alone near the punch bowl. "At what?" "Pretending this is normal." Asher looked at her, and that small smile played at the corners of his mouth again. "Who says I am pretending?" Before she could respond, her father appeared at her elbow. "Penelope, I need to speak with you. Privately." She followed him to the side of the house where they could talk without being overheard. Her father's face was drawn, exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical tiredness. "What have you done?" he asked, and his voice broke on the words. "I made a choice, Papa. You married a stranger, a man who could be anyone, could want anything." He ran his hand through his graying hair. "I know Thomas hurt you. I know today was supposed to be different, but this saved us," Penelope interrupted. "Do you think I do not know about the money, the debts? I have heard you and Mama talking late at night when you think I am asleep. Thomas leaving would have made everything worse, not just for me but for all of us. At least this way we got the wedding. People will talk, but they will not pity us quite so much, and Asher seems like a good man." "You do not know that, no," she admitted, "but I am choosing to believe it." "I have to believe it, Papa, because the alternative is that I just made the worst mistake of my life, and I cannot think about that right now." Her father pulled her into a hug, holding her tight the way he had when she was a little girl and had scraped her knee. "I am so sorry, sweetheart. You deserved better than this." "Maybe I am getting better," Penelope said into his shoulder. "Maybe Asher Price is better. I guess we will find out." When they returned to the party, Penelope found Asher talking with old Mr. Foster. The two men were deep in conversation about cattle and land management, and she was struck by how natural Asher looked, how easily he fit into this community he had walked into less than 2 hours ago. Clara appeared at Penelope's side, grabbing her arm. "Are you completely insane? Please tell me you are going to have this annulled." "I do not know what I am going to do," Penelope admitted, "but for now I am going to see this through." "He could be anyone, Penelope. He could be dangerous." "Look at him," Penelope said, nodding toward Asher. "Does he look dangerous to you?" Clara studied Asher critically. "He looks like trouble. Handsome trouble, I will give you that, but trouble nonetheless." Maybe that was what Penelope needed. Maybe Safe had gotten her a fiancé who left her at the altar. Maybe trouble would turn out better. The sun was setting by the time the last of the guests departed. Penelope's parents had tried to convince them to stay at the ranch for the night, but Asher had gently declined, saying he had a room at the hotel in town. The assumption was that Penelope would go with him, that they would spend their wedding night together like any normal couple. But nothing about this was normal. They rode into Carson City in Asher's wagon, a sturdy vehicle that spoke of a man who took care of his possessions. The horse pulling it was a beautiful chestnut mare with intelligent eyes. "Her name is Juniper," Asher said, noticing Penelope's attention. "Had her for 3 years now. Best horse I have ever owned." "She is beautiful," Penelope said, grateful for the mundane conversation. Anything to avoid thinking about what came next. The hotel was small but respectable. The owner, Mrs. Chen, raised an eyebrow when she saw them but said nothing, just handed over the key to Asher's room. Penelope followed him up the narrow stairs, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. The room was simple. One bed, a washstand, a chair by the window. Asher set his hat on the chair and turned to face her. "You take the bed," he said immediately. "I will sleep in the chair or on the floor if it is more comfortable." Penelope stared at him. "You are not going to." "No." His voice was firm but kind. "Penelope, we may be legally married, but we are strangers. I am not the kind of man who would expect anything from you under these circumstances, or any circumstances, really, unless you wanted it to." The relief was so intense it made her knees weak. She sank down onto the edge of the bed. "Why did you do this? Really? I know what you said in the church, but there has to be more to it." Asher was quiet for a long moment. He moved to the window, looking out at the darkening street. "I was engaged once, 3 years ago. Her name was Margaret. We had known each other since we were children, and everyone expected us to marry. I thought I loved her. I thought she loved me. What happened? She left. Not at the altar, but close enough. A week before the wedding, she ran off with a gambler passing through town. Took my savings with her, money I had been setting aside to buy more land." He turned to look at Penelope. "I know what it feels like to have people look at you with pity, to have them whisper about you, to wonder what you did wrong, what you could have done differently. So when I walked into that church today and saw you standing there, about to face that humiliation in front of everyone you know, I just thought maybe I could spare you some of that pain." "That is incredibly kind," Penelope said softly, "and possibly completely insane." He laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "Yeah, well, I have been accused of worse." "What happens now?" she asked. "Do we really try to make this marriage work, or do we wait a respectable amount of time and then quietly end it?" Asher came and sat in the chair, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "That is up to you. I meant what I said earlier. I do not do things halfway. I have a ranch north of here, like I mentioned. It is not much yet, but it is mine, bought and paid for. I run cattle, about 200 head right now. The house needs work, but it is solid. If you wanted to come out there, see what the life would be like, we could give this a real try. Take our time, get to know each other. Or if you want to go back to your family, I will give you money to help with their debts, and we can go our separate ways. Your choice, Penelope. Entirely your choice." She thought about going back to her parents' ranch, living under their roof again, facing the questions and the gossip. She thought about Thomas, who was probably somewhere in town right now, maybe with his childhood sweetheart, completely unbothered by the chaos he had caused. She thought about the life she had imagined for herself, the safe, predictable life that had just been torn away. And then she thought about the feel of Asher's hand in hers, steady and warm. The way he had looked at her without pity, the kindness in his eyes and the strength in his shoulders. The crazy, wonderful fact that he had walked into a church and volunteered to marry a complete stranger because it was the right thing to do. "I want to try," she heard herself say. "I want to see your ranch and meet your cattle and find out what it is like to be married to a man who rescues strangers." Asher's smile was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. "Then that is what we will do. We will leave tomorrow morning, if that is all right with you. Give you time to say goodbye to your family and pack your things." "Tomorrow," Penelope agreed. She stood up, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. "Asher, thank you for today, for all of it." "You are welcome, Penelope." He stood as well, moving back to the window. "Get some rest. It has been a long day." She changed into her nightdress behind the screen in the corner, then climbed into the bed. It was strange to be sharing a room with a man, even one who was being so respectful. She could hear him moving around quietly, settling into the chair. The moon was rising outside the window, casting silver light across the floor. "Asher," she whispered into the darkness. "Yeah, this is the strangest day of my entire life." She heard him chuckle softly. "Mine too, Mrs. Price, mine too." Despite everything, Penelope smiled. Then, impossibly, she fell asleep. The morning brought a clarity that the previous day had lacked. Penelope woke to find Asher already gone from the room, a note left on the chair saying he had gone to get breakfast and supplies for the journey. She dressed carefully in her traveling clothes, a practical skirt and blouse that were far more suited to her than the elaborate wedding dress had been. When Asher returned, he brought fresh bread, cheese, and apples, which they ate together while planning the day. First, they would go to her parents' ranch so she could pack her belongings. Then they would head north to Asher's property, a journey that would take most of the day. The conversation with her parents was difficult. Her mother cried, her father looked grim, and her younger sister Emily clung to her like she was never coming back. "It is not that far," Penelope assured them. 30 miles. I can visit and you can come see me once we are settled." Her mother pressed a small package into her hands. "Your grandmother's locket and some herbs from the garden, and I put in some of my starter for sourdough bread. You will need that to make proper." "Mama," Penelope hugged her tightly, "I will be fine, I promise." "He seems like a good man," her father said grudgingly to Asher. "But if you hurt my daughter, if you turn out to be anything other than what you seem, I will come find you. Is that understood?" "Perfectly, sir." Asher shook his hand firmly. "And I give you my word, I will do everything in my power to make sure she is safe and happy." They left just after noon, Penelope's trunk loaded into the back of the wagon alongside Asher's supplies. As they drove away from the only home she had ever known, Penelope felt a mixture of fear and excitement that made her stomach flutter. "Tell me about your ranch," she said, wanting to fill the silence with something other than her anxious thoughts. "Well, like I said, it is not much yet. The house is 2 rooms, kitchen area, and a bedroom. I have been working on adding another room, but I have not finished it yet. There is a good barn, solid corrals for the horses and cattle. A creek runs through the north side of the property, so we have reliable water. The land is mostly grazing land, some stands of pine up in the higher elevations. You run it alone, mostly. I have a neighbor, Daniel Shaw, who helps out during roundup and branding. And there is a man named Joe who works for me part-time. He is getting older, so he cannot do as much as he used to, but he is good with the horses." "What will I do?" Penelope asked. "I mean, on a ranch like that, what would my role be?" Asher glanced at her. "Whatever you want it to be. I imagine there will be plenty to do around the house, and I would appreciate help with the garden and the chickens if that is something you are interested in. But Penelope, I am not expecting you to be some kind of servant. You are my wife, and that means we are partners. If you want to learn about the cattle, I will teach you. If you want to ride the property lines with me, you are welcome to. If you want to spend your days reading books under a tree, that is fine too. This is your home now as much as it is mine." His words eased something in her chest. She had been worried, though she had not voiced it, that he would expect her to simply slot into some predetermined role, that she would have traded one cage for another. But the way he spoke suggested something different, something more equal. "I am good with animals," she offered. "We always had chickens and a milk cow back home, and I helped with them. And I can shoot, like I mentioned. My father taught me when I was 12. Those are good skills to have out here." Asher nodded approvingly. "We do not get much trouble, but it is good to know you can handle yourself if something comes up." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the wagon creaking gently as Juniper pulled them steadily north. The landscape changed gradually, becoming more rugged and wild. The flat valley around Carson City gave way to rolling hills covered in sagebrush and scattered pines. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still touched with snow even though it was late spring. "It is beautiful," Penelope said, meaning it. "Wait until you see it in the fall," Asher said. The aspens up in the high country turn gold, and the whole mountainside looks like it is on fire with color. Or in the winter, when everything is covered in snow and it is so quiet you can hear your own heartbeat. This land gets into your blood after a while. I came out here 4 years ago from Missouri, and I knew within a week that I would never leave." "Why did you leave Missouri?" "After Margaret left, there did not seem to be much point in staying. Too many memories, too many people who knew my business. I wanted a fresh start, somewhere I could build something that was completely mine. So I packed up everything I owned, which was not much after Margaret cleaned me out, and I headed west." Worked on various ranches, saved my money, and finally found this piece of land that was available. Bought it 2 years ago and have been building it up ever since. You have family back in Missouri. My mother passed when I was 15. My father remarried a year later, and I did not get along with his new wife. I have a brother, younger by 4 years, but we lost touch after I left. What about you? I met your parents and your sister, but anyone else? That is it, just the four of us. My mother came from a big family back east, but they did not approve of her marrying my father, so she left and never went back. My father's family were ranchers here in Nevada, but they died in a hard winter about 10 years ago, so it has just been us, making do on that little piece of land. That is why your father was willing to go into debt for your wedding, Asher said quietly. He wanted to give you something special, something that would start you off right in life. Yes, Penelope's throat tightened, and instead it turned into a disaster or an adventure. Asher looked at her with those steady blue eyes. Depends on how you choose to see it, an adventure. Penelope turned the word over in her mind. She had never thought of her life in those terms before. She had been focused on stability, on security, on finding a safe harbor in an uncertain world. But maybe safe had been overrated. Maybe what she really needed was someone who saw disasters as adventures, who could take a humiliating moment and turn it into a new beginning. They stopped for a meal in the early afternoon, pulling off the road near a small stream. Asher unhitched Juniper and let her drink and graze while he and Penelope ate the bread and cheese they had brought. The sun was warm, the water made pleasant sounds as it flowed over rocks, and for a moment, Penelope could almost forget the strangeness of her situation. "Can I ask you something?" Asher said as they sat on a fallen log. "Of course. Did you love him? Thomas, I mean." Penelope considered the question carefully. "I thought I did. We had known each other for so long, and he was kind to me, at least at first. He would bring me wildflowers and tell me I was pretty. When he asked me to marry him, it felt like the natural next step. But looking back, I do not think I loved him so much as I loved the idea of being married, of having my own home and family. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense." Asher picked up a small stone and tossed it into the stream. "I felt the same way about Margaret. I thought I loved her, but really I just loved the idea of her. The real woman, the one who would steal from me and run off with a stranger, I did not know her at all." "How do you trust again after something like that?" Slowly. He looked at her. "And by being honest, Margaret and I never really talked about important things. We just assumed we wanted the same life. But assumptions are dangerous. So I figure if you and I are going to make this work, we need to talk about everything. The good, the bad, the uncomfortable. No secrets, no assumptions. What do you think?" "I think that sounds terrifying," Penelope admitted, "but also right." "Then let me start. I am not a perfect man, Penelope. I have a temper, though I have never raised a hand to anyone who did not deserve it. I get focused on my work sometimes and forget to eat or sleep. I am stubborn as hell when I think I am right about something. And I have days where Margaret's betrayal still stings, where I wonder if I did something wrong, if I could have been better somehow. Those are my flaws, laid out plain." Penelope took a deep breath. "I worry too much about what people think. I can be too cautious, too afraid to take risks. I have a tendency to hold grudges, and I am not very good at letting things go. And I cry when I am angry, which I hate because it makes me feel weak." "Crying does not make you weak," Asher said firmly. "And holding a grudge against Thomas right now seems pretty justified to me." She smiled despite herself. "Thank you for that." They packed up and continued on, the wagon rolling steadily northward. As the afternoon wore on, Asher pointed out landmarks, teaching her the lay of the land. There was a distinctive rock formation that marked the turnoff to Daniel Shaw's property. A stand of particularly tall pines indicated where good hunting could be found in the fall. A meadow full of wildflowers would be perfect for gathering herbs. "You have thought about this," Penelope observed. "About bringing a wife here. You have thought about what she would need to know." Asher looked surprised, then sheepish. "I guess I have. I mean, I have spent the last 2 years telling myself I would never get married, that I was better off alone. But I suppose part of me was still hoping that someday I would find someone worth sharing all this with. And instead you got stuck with a stranger you had to rescue." "I did not get stuck with anything." He said it so firmly that she looked at him in surprise. "I made a choice, Penelope. Nobody forced me to walk into that church or to speak those vows. I saw a woman who needed help, yes, but I also saw a woman who was brave enough to face her worst moment head-on, who held her head high when anyone else would have fallen apart. That takes strength. That takes courage. Those are qualities I admire, qualities I want in a partner. So no, I do not feel stuck. I feel like maybe I got lucky." Penelope felt warmth spread through her chest, a feeling she could not quite name. It was too soon to call it love, far too soon, but it was something, the beginning of something. "I think I got lucky too," she said quietly. They arrived at the ranch just as the sun was beginning to set. The house was just as Asher had described it, small but sturdy, made of logs with a stone chimney rising from one side. The barn was larger than she had expected, well maintained with fresh paint on the doors. Corrals stretched out behind it, and she could see cattle grazing in the distance, dark shapes against the golden hillside. "Home," Asher said, and there was pride in his voice. He helped her down from the wagon, and they stood together for a moment, looking at the place that would now be her home. It was so different from her parents' ranch, from Carson City, from everything she had known. But it was beautiful in its wildness, in its isolation, in its potential. "Let me show you inside," Asher said. The interior of the house was spare but clean. The main room held a wood stove, a table with 4 chairs, a rocking chair by the fireplace, and shelves lined with books. The bedroom was just big enough for a large bed, a wardrobe, and a small dresser. Everything was orderly, organized in a way that spoke of a man who lived alone and liked his space a certain way. "I know it is not much," Asher said, sounding uncertain for the first time since she had met him, "but we can add to it. That room I mentioned, I was planning to make it a study, but it could be a sewing room or whatever you wanted." "It is perfect," Penelope said, and she meant it. The house felt solid, safe, like a place where she could build a life. "Asher, it is really perfect." He smiled, relief clear on his face. "I am glad you think so. Now I need to take care of Juniper and check on the cattle before dark. There is food in the pantry if you are hungry and firewood stacked outside the back door. Make yourself at home. This is your space now as much as mine." After he left, Penelope walked slowly through the house, touching things, getting a feel for this new place. The books on the shelves were a mix of practical manuals about ranching and animal husbandry, and novels by authors like Hawthorne and Cooper. The dishes in the cupboard were simple but well made. The bed was covered with a beautiful quilt that showed skills Asher almost certainly did not possess, probably made by his mother or someone else from his past. She found her trunk had been brought in and set at the foot of the bed. She unpacked slowly, hanging her few dresses in the wardrobe, placing her brush and mirror on the dresser. Her mother's package yielded the locket, which she clasped around her neck immediately, and the herbs and sourdough starter, which she took to the kitchen area. By the time Asher returned, she had started a fire in the stove and was making a simple supper from the supplies she found in the pantry. He stopped in the doorway, watching her move around the kitchen, and something in his expression made her heart skip. "Smells good," he said. Just beans and cornbread, nothing fancy. Fancy is overrated. He washed up at the basin and then joined her at the table. They ate in comfortable silence, both exhausted from the long day. After supper, Asher insisted on cleaning up while Penelope sat in the rocking chair, feeling the day catch up with her all at once. She watched him work, efficient and careful, and thought about how strange it was that just yesterday morning she had been preparing to marry Thomas. And now she was here, in a house she had never seen before, with a man she barely knew. "I will sleep in the main room tonight," Asher said, drying the last dish. "Give you privacy to settle in." "That does not seem fair. It is your house, your bed." "It is our house now, and the bed is big enough for both of us. If you are comfortable with that, I will stay on my side, I promise. But if you would rather I sleep out here, I am happy to do that too." Penelope thought about it. The bed was large, and she trusted Asher to keep his word. More than that, something about having him nearby felt right. Safe. "We can share the bed," she said. "We are married after all. Even if it is not a conventional marriage." "Nothing about us is conventional," Asher said with a small smile. "Might as well embrace it." That night, lying in the darkness with Asher on the far side of the bed, Penelope stared at the ceiling and thought about the turns her life had taken in just 2 days. She should have been in Thomas's bed right now, starting a life she had spent months planning. Instead, she was here with a man who had been a stranger 48 hours ago in a house in the middle of nowhere, and somehow, impossibly, she was not unhappy about it. "Asher," she whispered, "are you awake?" "Yeah. Do you think we can really make this work? A marriage that started the way ours did." She heard him shift, turning toward her though they were still separated by a good 2 feet of space. "I think that how a marriage starts matters less than how the people in it choose to keep going. We could have the most romantic beginning in the world and still end up miserable if we did not treat each other right. Or we could start the way we did and build something real if we are both willing to put in the effort. It is up to us, Penelope. Every day it will be up to us." "I want to try," she said. "I really want to try. Then that is what we will do." She fell asleep to the sound of his breathing, steady and reassuring in the darkness. The next weeks fell into a pattern. Asher would rise before dawn to tend to the cattle and horses. Penelope would make breakfast, then spend her days learning the rhythms of the ranch. She took over the care of the chickens, gathering eggs and talking to the birds like they were old friends. She planted a proper garden, using the seeds and herbs her mother had sent. She learned to make bread in the small oven, milk the cow that Asher kept for fresh dairy, and preserve meat for the winter months still far off. But she also insisted on learning about the cattle. Asher taught her to ride properly, not the side-saddle way she had learned as a girl, but astride, like a person who needed to get work done. He showed her how to check the cattle for illness, how to identify which were ready for market, how to mend fences and track predators that might threaten the herd. "You are a natural at this," he told her one afternoon after she had successfully herded a stubborn steer back to the main group. "I like it," she admitted. "I like being outside doing things that matter. I always thought I would spend my life cooking and cleaning and raising children, and those things are fine, but this feels like I am building something." "You are," Asher said. "We both are." They talked constantly, learning each other in ways that most couples did before marriage. She learned that he loved music, but could not carry a tune to save his life. He learned that she had a gift for numbers and could calculate figures in her head faster than he could write them down. She learned that he had a soft spot for stray animals and had once spent 3 days nursing an injured hawk back to health. He learned that she could swear like a sailor when she was frustrated, something that made him laugh so hard he nearly fell off his horse. They were learning to be partners, to work together as a team, But there was still a careful distance between them, a line that neither crossed. They shared the bed, but they stayed on their respective sides. They touched during the course of work, but those touches were practical, not personal. They were building a foundation, but neither seemed sure how to move beyond that. One evening, about 6 weeks after their wedding, they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset. It had become a ritual, this quiet time at the end of the day when they would rest and talk about nothing in particular. "There is a dance in town next week," Asher said. "Daniel mentioned it this morning. We do not have to go if you do not want to, but I thought I would mention it." Penelope's first instinct was to say no. Going back to Carson City meant facing people, facing questions, facing Thomas if he was still around. But she had been on the ranch for 6 weeks without seeing another soul besides Asher and occasionally Joe or Daniel. She was starting to feel isolated in a way that had nothing to do with physical distance. "I think I would like to go," she said. "If you want to, I mean. I want to." Asher looked at her. "I want people to see us together, see that we are making this work, and I want to dance with my wife." Something in the way he said, "my wife," made her shiver. There was possession in it, but also pride. He was not ashamed of their strange beginning or the fact that they were still figuring things out. He wanted to claim her publicly, and she found that she wanted to be claimed. The night of the dance, Penelope wore her best dress, a blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes. Asher put on a clean shirt and vest, and when he helped her into the wagon, his hand lingered on her waist just a moment longer than necessary. The dance was being held in the town hall, a large building that served as everything from church to school to social center. Music spilled out into the street, fiddles, and a piano playing a lively tune. Penelope's stomach clenched with nervousness as they approached, but Asher took her hand and squeezed it reassuringly. The moment they walked in, conversation stopped. Everyone turned to look at them, the couple whose wedding had been the talk of Carson City for weeks. Penelope held her head high, remembering that day in the church when she had refused to hide. Then Clara was there, pulling Penelope into a fierce hug. "You look wonderful. I have been so worried about you, stuck out on that ranch with a man you barely know." "I am fine, Clara." "Better than fine, actually." "Is he treating you well? Because if he is not, we can figure something out," my father said. "Clara," Penelope pulled back and looked her friend in the eye. "He is treating me very well, better than I could have hoped for, honestly." Clara studied her face, then slowly smiled. "You mean that? You really mean that?" "I really do." The evening progressed better than Penelope had feared. Yes, people stared and whispered, but there were also plenty of folks who congratulated them, who seemed genuinely happy that the story had ended well. And when Thomas appeared with his childhood sweetheart, both of them looking uncomfortable, Penelope felt nothing but relief. Relief that she was not with him, that she had escaped a life that would have made her miserable in ways she had not even recognized until they were no longer her future. When the dancing started, Asher led her onto the floor. He was a good dancer, confident and smooth, and Penelope found herself laughing as he spun her around. "You have been holding out on me," she said. "You did not mention you could dance like this. You never asked." His eyes were bright with amusement. "What else do you want to know about me?" "Everything," she said, and realized it was true. She wanted to know every detail, every story, every small thing that made him who he was. Something shifted in his expression, becoming more serious. "Penelope, I know we said we would take this slow, but I need you to know something. This is not pretend for me anymore. Maybe it never was, but especially not now. I know we started this as a practical arrangement, but somewhere along the way I started falling for you. And if you do not feel the same, that is fine, I will not push. But I needed you to know." Her heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear the music. Asher, you do not have to say anything, he said quickly. I just wanted to be honest like we promised. No, let me speak. She pulled him to a stop at the edge of the dance floor, away from the other couples. I feel the same. I did not expect to. I thought this would always be just an arrangement, but you have been so kind and so patient and so genuinely good. And I like the life we are building together. I like waking up next to you and working alongside you and talking to you at the end of the day. I like you, Asher Price, a lot. His smile was like the sun coming up. Yeah. He pulled her close, right there in front of everyone, and kissed her. Not the brief, careful kiss from their wedding day, but a real kiss, deep and passionate and full of promise. Penelope melted into it, her hands coming up to rest on his chest, feeling his heart racing under her palms. When they finally broke apart, there was applause from the people around them. Penelope laughed, burying her face in Asher's shoulder in embarrassment. I think they approve, Asher murmured against her hair. I think I do not care either way, she murmured back. They stayed at the dance for another hour, but both of them were eager to get home. The ride back to the ranch felt different from every other time they had made that journey. There was an anticipation in the air, a sense that something fundamental had shifted between them. When they arrived home, Asher helped her down from the wagon, but instead of releasing her, he pulled her close. Are you sure about this, about us? I am sure, Penelope said, and she was. Whatever doubts she had harbored were gone, burned away by the certainty of her feelings. That night, for the first time, they truly became husband and wife in every sense. Asher was gentle and patient, making sure she was comfortable at every step. And when it was over, they lay tangled together, and Penelope felt a completeness she had never experienced before. I love you, Asher whispered into the darkness. I love you too, Penelope whispered back, and meant it with her whole heart. The months that followed were the happiest of Penelope's life. The ranch prospered, the cattle thriving under their combined care. The garden produced more vegetables than they could use, so they traded the excess in town for supplies they needed. The additional room Asher had been working on was finished, and they turned it into a proper sitting room with comfortable chairs and good light for reading. Penelope's parents visited frequently, her father slowly warming to Asher as he saw how hard the younger man worked and how happy his daughter was. Her mother loved the ranch and often stayed for days at a time, helping with preserving food and teaching Penelope more complex recipes. On one of these visits, about 5 months after the wedding, Penelope's mother pulled her aside while they were working in the garden. You are glowing, her mother said. I have not seen you this happy since you were a little girl. I am happy, Mama, happier than I ever thought I would be. And Asher is good to you. He is wonderful to me. I know you worried, I know everyone worried, but he is everything I could want in a husband. He treats me as an equal partner, he listens when I talk, he makes me laugh. I did not know marriage could be like this. Her mother smiled, tears gathering in her eyes. I am so glad, sweetheart. When Thomas left you at that altar, I thought your life was over, but instead it was just beginning. That night, after her parents had left, Penelope realized something. She had not had her monthly courses in more than 6 weeks. She had been so busy, so caught up in the work of the ranch and the joy of her marriage, that she had not noticed. But now that she thought about it, there were other signs too. A tenderness in her breasts. A slight queasiness in the mornings that passed quickly. A bone-deep tiredness that no amount of sleep seemed to cure. She was pregnant. She should tell Asher right away, she knew that. But she wanted to be sure first, did not want to get his hopes up if she was wrong. So she waited another 2 weeks, and when the signs only grew stronger, she finally told him. They were sitting on the porch, watching the stars come out when she said, "Asher, I have something to tell you." "That sounds serious." He turned to look at her, concern in his eyes. "Is everything all right?" "Everything is wonderful. I am pregnant." For a moment he did not react. Then his face broke into a smile so wide and joyful that it made her laugh. He pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully like she was made of glass. "Are you sure?" "Pretty sure." "I am 6 weeks late and there are other signs. I wanted to wait a bit before telling you just to be certain. A baby." He said it with wonder. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy about it?" "Happy, Penelope, I am beyond happy. I am absolutely thrilled." He kissed her deeply, then pulled back and looked worried. "Should you be working as hard as you have been? With the cattle and everything? Women have babies while working ranches all the time," she said, amused by his sudden protectiveness. "I will be fine. I will be careful, but I will not stop doing everything just because I am pregnant. But you will let me help more, and you will rest when you need to." "Yes, I promise." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Penelope continued to work, though she let Asher take over the heavier tasks. As fall turned to winter, she spent more time inside, sewing tiny clothes and preparing the house for the baby. Asher built a beautiful cradle from pine wood, sanding it smooth and carving small designs into the sides. "What should we name the baby?" Penelope asked one evening as they sat by the fire, her knitting needles clicking steadily. "If it is a boy, I like the name James, after my father. Despite how things ended between us, he was a good man before he remarried. And if it is a girl, you should choose." "If it is a girl, I like the name Rose, simple and pretty. James or Rose Price." Asher tried out the names. "I like them both." The baby came in early March, during a late snowstorm that made it impossible to fetch the doctor from town. Penelope's mother was there, thankfully, having come to stay for the last month of the pregnancy. She guided Penelope through the labor, her calm presence keeping panic at bay. Asher paced in the main room, wearing a path in the floorboards. Every time Penelope cried out, he would start toward the bedroom, only to have Joe, who had come to help, hold him back. "Let the women do their work," Joe said gruffly. "You will just be in the way." It was a long labor, lasting through the night and into the next morning. But finally, just as the sun was breaking through the clouds, the baby's cry filled the house. Asher rushed into the bedroom to find Penelope propped up against pillows, exhausted but smiling, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. "A son," she said. "We have a son." Asher approached slowly, almost reverently. He looked down at the tiny face, red and scrunched up, and fell in love all over again. "James, our son James." He sat on the edge of the bed, and Penelope placed the baby in his arms. Asher held his son with extreme care, marveling at the tiny fingers, the miniature features, the sheer miracle of this new life they had created. "He is perfect," Asher whispered. "You are perfect. Thank you, Penelope. Thank you for this gift." Tears ran down Penelope's face, but they were happy tears. She looked at her husband holding their son, and she thought about that day in the church when her life had seemed to be falling apart. She thought about the stranger who had stepped forward and offered her a different path. And she thought about all the moments since then, all the days and nights of building a life together, of falling in love, of becoming a real family. "No," she said softly. "Thank you for walking into that church, for giving me a chance at a different life, for loving me." Asher looked up from the baby, his eyes bright with emotion. "I would do it again in a heartbeat. Every single moment, every single choice that led me to you, I would make them all over again." As winter gave way to spring, life on the ranch settled into a new rhythm that included baby James. Penelope adjusted to motherhood with the same determination she had brought to learning ranching. There were exhausting nights when the baby would not sleep, days when she felt like she had no idea what she was doing, But through it all, Asher was there. He would walk the floor with James in the middle of the night, singing off key lullabies that somehow soothed the fussy infant. He would take over the baby's care so Penelope could rest, learning to change diapers and heat bottles with the same careful attention he gave to everything else. "You are a natural at this," Penelope told him one afternoon, watching him play with James on a blanket spread in the sunshine. "I just follow his lead," Asher said, making funny faces that sent the baby into peals of laughter. "He is pretty good at telling me what he needs." Daniel and his wife Sarah came to visit, bringing a beautiful hand-sewn quilt as a gift. Sarah held James with the ease of someone who had raised 5 children of her own, and she offered Penelope advice and reassurance. "You are doing wonderfully," Sarah said. "I know it does not always feel like it, but trust me, you are. And you have a good man there who helps. That makes all the difference." "I do," Penelope agreed, watching Asher and Daniel discuss plans for the next cattle drive. "I really do." As James grew from an infant into a chubby, curious baby, Penelope and Asher's love deepened. They were no longer two people figuring out how to be married. They were a team, partners in every sense, united by their love for each other and their son. One evening, when James was about 9 months old and finally sleeping through the night, Asher and Penelope sat on the porch in their usual spot. The stars were brilliant overhead, and a warm breeze carried the scent of sage and pine. "I have been thinking," Asher said, about how different my life is now compared to a year and a half ago. How I thought I was content being alone, building this ranch by myself. And then I walked into that church and saw you, and everything changed." "You regret it?" Penelope asked, though she was pretty sure she knew the answer. "Not for a single second. You and James, you are everything to me. This ranch is still important, but it is not the most important thing anymore. You two are." He took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "I just wanted you to know that. I wanted you to know that walking into that church was the best decision I ever made." "It was the best thing that ever happened to me too," Penelope said. "I know that sounds strange since it came out of such a horrible moment. But Thomas leaving me at that altar led me to you, and I would not change that for anything." "Do you ever think about what your life would have been like if you had married him?" Penelope considered the question. "Sometimes. I think I would have been fine, probably. Not unhappy exactly, but not truly happy either. I would have lived a small, safe life, never really challenged, never really growing. With you, I have had to step outside my comfort zone constantly, and it has made me stronger. You have made me better." "You have made me better too," Asher said. "Less closed off, more willing to be vulnerable. You taught me that it is okay to need someone, to depend on someone. After Margaret, I had convinced myself that self-sufficiency was the only way to avoid getting hurt again. But you showed me that real strength is in partnership, in trusting someone enough to let them see all of you." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, hands linked, watching the sky. Inside, they could hear James making small sounds in his sleep, the contented noises of a baby who felt safe and loved. "I want more," Penelope said suddenly. "More what?" "More of this. More children, more years, more of everything. I want to grow old with you, Asher. I want to watch our children grow up and have children of their own. I want 50 years of sitting on this porch with you, watching the stars." Asher pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "That sounds perfect. Absolutely perfect." 3 years passed in a blur of hard work and deep happiness. The ranch continued to grow, and they were able to hire 2 full-time ranch hands, which eased the workload considerably. Asher and Daniel partnered on a cattle drive to Sacramento, making enough profit to build additions onto both their houses. Penelope started a small business selling preserved foods and baked goods in town. her skill with numbers making her a shrewd businesswoman. James grew into a bright, energetic child who followed his father everywhere, pestering him with endless questions about the cattle and horses. And when James was 3, Penelope gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Rose, fulfilling the name they had chosen years before. Rose was different from James in every way. Where he was loud and boisterous, she was quiet and thoughtful. Where he could not sit still, she would contentedly play with her dolls for hours. Asher adored both his children equally, but there was something special about watching this rough cowboy tenderly care for his tiny daughter. "You have turned me soft," he told Penelope one night after spending an hour having a tea party with Rose and her stuffed animals. "You were always soft," Penelope replied. "You just needed the right people to bring it out." 2 more children followed, another son named William, and finally another daughter named Grace. The house was constantly full of noise and laughter and the organized chaos that came with 4 young children. Money was sometimes tight, and there were bad years when the cattle market dropped or drought threatened the rangeland. But through it all, Asher and Penelope faced everything as a team. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Asher took Penelope back to Carson City for a rare night away from the children, who stayed with her parents. They had dinner at the hotel restaurant, a luxury they rarely indulged in, and then went to a dance at the town hall, just like they had done the night they first admitted their feelings for each other. "You remember the first time we danced here?" Asher asked as he spun her around the floor. "How could I forget? That was the night everything changed." "Everything changed the moment I walked into that church," Asher corrected. "That night was just when we finally admitted what we both knew was happening." They danced until late, then walked slowly back to the hotel, hand in hand. The streets of Carson City were quiet at that hour, lit by gas lamps that created pools of golden light. "Can I tell you something?" Penelope said as they walked, always. "Sometimes I think about Thomas and wonder what became of him. If he is happy, if he married that woman, if he ever regrets what he did. And then I realize I do not actually care. He gave me the greatest gift imaginable by leaving me at that altar, even though he did not intend to. He freed me to find real love, real partnership. So in a way, I should probably thank him." Asher laughed. "Somehow I do not think he would appreciate that sentiment. Probably not." Penelope stopped walking and turned to face her husband. The lamplight cast shadows across his face, highlighting the small lines at the corners of his eyes, the threads of silver just starting to show in his hair. He was aging, as was she, but she thought he only grew more handsome with each passing year. "I love you, Asher Price. More than I did yesterday and less than I will tomorrow." "That is a beautiful sentiment." He pulled her close, kissing her deeply right there on the street where anyone could see. When he pulled back, his eyes were soft with emotion. "I love you too, Penelope. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, and I thank God every day for the impulse that made me walk into that church." The years continued to pass. James grew into a responsible young man who took over more of the ranch work. Rose developed a talent for music and would play the piano they had bought for hours. William followed his older brother everywhere, eager to learn the ranching business. And Grace, the baby, was fearless and wild, always climbing trees or riding horses too fast. Asher's hair turned fully gray, and he developed a limp from an old injury that acted up in cold weather. Penelope found lines etching deeper around her eyes and mouth, marks of a life well lived and frequently smiling. They were in their 40s now, no longer young but still very much in love. One spring evening, when the children were all asleep and the house was quiet, Asher and Penelope sat in their usual spot on the porch. They had replaced the old wooden chairs with more comfortable ones, a concession to aging bones. "You remember what you said on our 10th anniversary?" Asher asked. "About loving me more than yesterday and less than tomorrow, I do." "Is it still true?" Penelope looked at her husband, at the face she knew better than her own, at the man who had changed her entire life with one impulsive act of kindness. "More than ever. Every year, every day, I love you more. I did not think it was possible to love someone this much, but you keep proving me wrong." "Good." Asher reached over and took her hand, his thumb tracing familiar patterns on her skin. "Because I feel the same way. You are my home, Penelope. Not this ranch, not this house. You." As they sat there in the gathering darkness, Penelope reflected on the strange journey that had brought them to this moment. A disastrous wedding day that had felt like the end of the world. A stranger stepping forward with an impossible offer. A marriage that should not have worked, but somehow did. Years of building a life together, of facing challenges and celebrating triumphs, of raising children and growing old side by side. If someone had told her, standing at that altar on what was supposed to be her wedding day to Thomas, that she would end up here, with this man living this life, she never would have believed them. But looking back now, she could not imagine it any other way. The children grew up and started lives of their own. James married a sweet girl from town and built a house on the northern edge of their property. Rose shocked everyone by becoming a teacher and moving to Carson City, though she visited frequently. William took over the day-to-day running of the ranch as Asher's arthritis made physical work harder. And Grace married a young lawyer and moved all the way to San Francisco, though she wrote long letters every week. Penelope and Asher became grandparents, and then great-grandparents. The house that had once been filled with the noise of their own children now echoed with the laughter of grandchildren visiting. Asher taught his grandsons to ride and rope cattle. Penelope taught her granddaughters to cook and preserve food, passing on skills that had served her well. On a late summer evening, when they were both in their 70s, Asher and Penelope sat on their porch as they had done thousands of times before. Asher's hands shook slightly with age, and Penelope's vision was not what it used to be, but they were still there, still together, still watching the sun set over the land they had built a life on. "You ever regret it?" Penelope asked, a question that had occurred to her occasionally over the years, but that she had never quite voiced. Walking into that church, taking on someone else's abandoned bride. Asher looked at her with eyes that were still that startling blue, even if they were surrounded by wrinkles now. "Not once, not for a single moment of a single day. You have been my greatest adventure, Penelope Price, and I would do it all again in a heartbeat. Even the hard parts, the years when money was tight, the winter William got so sick we thought we might lose him, all of it." "Especially the hard parts," Asher said firmly. "Because we faced them together. That is what marriage is, what love is. It is not just being there for the good times. It is standing together when things are difficult and coming out the other side stronger." Penelope felt tears gathering in her eyes, but they were happy tears. "I am so glad you walked into that church. So am I." Asher squeezed her hand gently. "Best decision I ever made." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple, Penelope leaned her head on Asher's shoulder. They sat like that in comfortable silence, two people who had found each other in the most unlikely way and built a love that had lasted a lifetime. Inside the house, they could hear William and his wife preparing dinner, the sound of their grandchildren playing. The ranch was in good hands, the family was thriving, and the legacy they had built together would continue long after they were gone. But for now they were here, still together after more than 50 years of marriage, still in love, still grateful for that day when everything went wrong, and yet somehow turned out more right than either of them could have imagined. The years that followed were gentle ones. Asher and Penelope spent their days sitting in the sun, telling stories to their grandchildren, and enjoying the peaceful quiet that came with age. They remained on the ranch, in the house Asher had built all those years ago, though it had been expanded and improved until it was barely recognizable as the simple two-room cabin it had started as. On a cool morning in early autumn, Asher did not wake up. He had gone peacefully in his sleep, his hand still resting in Penelope's where it had been when they went to bed. She sat with him for a long while, holding that beloved hand, feeling the absence of his warmth. At his funeral, attended by what seemed like half the territory, Penelope stood strong and spoke of the man who had rescued her all those years ago. She told the story of walking into that church and seeing a stranger in the doorway. She talked about the life they had built together, the love they had shared, the family they had created. "He was the best man I ever knew," she said, her voice clear despite her tears. "And I was blessed beyond measure to call him my husband." After Asher's death, many people assumed Penelope would move in with one of her children, that she would leave the ranch that held so many memories. But she refused. This was her home, the place where she had discovered who she really was, where she had loved and been loved in return. She would not leave it. She lived for 5 more years, surrounded by family, tending a small garden and sitting on that porch every evening at sunset. People would often find her talking to the empty chair beside her, carrying on conversations with Asher as if he were still there. And perhaps, in the ways that mattered most, he was. On a spring morning with wildflowers blooming in the meadow beyond the house, Penelope passed away peacefully in her sleep. She was buried next to Asher on a small hill overlooking the ranch, under a pine tree they had planted together decades ago. At her funeral, her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren gathered to remember a woman who had faced humiliation and heartbreak and had emerged stronger. They told the story of the wedding that almost was not, of the stranger who stepped forward, of the unlikely love that had grown into a lifetime of devotion. She always said that the worst day of her life turned into the best, Rose told the assembled crowd, tears running down her aging face. That being left at the altar was actually a gift, because it led her to Dad. She taught us that sometimes the things that seem like disasters are actually opportunities in disguise. You just have to be brave enough to see them that way. The ranch remained in the family, passed down through generations who heard the story of how it all began. Great-great-grandchildren played in the yard where Penelope had once planted her first garden. The house, continually maintained and updated, still stood solid and strong. And on the porch, the 2 chairs remained, side by side, facing west toward the sunset. Visitors to the ranch, especially young couples just starting out, would often sit in those chairs and feel the love that still seemed to linger there. They would hear the story of Asher and Penelope, and they would be inspired to face their own challenges with courage and hope. Because that was the legacy of the cowboy who said, "I will stand there instead." Not just a ranch or a family or a piece of land, but a story of how love can bloom in the most unexpected places, how the worst moments can transform into new beginnings, how a split-second decision to help a stranger can change not just 2 lives, but generations of lives to come. And so the story lived on, told and retold, embellished and remembered, a tale of the Old West that was about more than just cowboys and cattle and frontier justice. It was a love story, pure and simple. The best kind of love story, the kind that was true. In Carson City, a memorial was eventually erected in the town square, not to Asher and Penelope specifically, but to all the pioneers who had built the town and surrounding ranches. But everyone knew that the statue of a cowboy standing beside a woman in a wedding dress was inspired by their story. Young people would touch the statue for luck before their own weddings, hoping for a love as strong and true as the one that had started so improbably all those years ago. The church where they were married still stood, though it had been renovated many times over the decades. The reverend who had married them, long since passed himself, had recorded the event in the church records, noting that it was the most unusual and yet somehow most appropriate wedding I have ever performed. The hotel where they had stayed on their wedding night became something of a historic sight. Couples would request the room Asher and Penelope had stayed in, wanting to start their marriages in the same place where such an unlikely love had begun to bloom. But the ranch remained the true testament to their love. It prospered through generations, through economic downturns and boom times, through droughts and floods and all the challenges that came with working the land. The family that Asher and Penelope had started grew and spread, but they always remembered their roots, always came back to that land that had been transformed from a bachelor's dream into a family legacy. In the family Bible, carefully preserved and passed down, Asher had written an inscription years before his death. It was discovered after Penelope passed away, tucked between the pages where their marriage certificate was kept. To anyone who reads this in years to come, it said in Asher's careful handwriting, remember that love can find you in the strangest ways. I walked into a church one day and saw a woman in a wedding dress, humiliated and hurting, and I made a decision in an instant that changed my entire life. I said I would stand there instead, and in doing so, I found the other half of my soul. Penelope was and is the love of my life, my partner in all things, the mother of my children and the keeper of my heart. If this old cowboy could find such love by taking a risk on a stranger, then there is hope for anyone. Be brave. Take chances. Stand up when others are falling down. You never know what miracles might follow. The inscription became famous in the family, read at weddings and anniversaries, invoked during hard times as a reminder that taking risks could lead to beautiful outcomes. It was embroidered on quilts and carved into wooden signs, and taught to children as soon as they were old enough to understand. And every year, on the anniversary of that fateful wedding day, the family would gather at the ranch. They would have a celebration, with music and dancing and food, honoring not just Asher and Penelope, but the love they had built and the example they had set. It was a reminder that family was not just about blood, but about choices, about standing by each other, about building something that would last beyond one lifetime. The land itself seemed to remember them. The pine tree where they were buried grew tall and strong, its branches providing shade for generations of family picnics and quiet contemplations. The creek where Asher had once taught James to fish still ran clear and cold, now teaching great-great-grandchildren the same lessons. The meadow where Penelope had gathered wildflowers every spring still bloomed with color, a riot of natural beauty that seemed to celebrate their memory. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind blew just right, people swore they could hear laughter from the direction of those two chairs on the porch. The sound of two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life together from the ruins of a broken dream, who had proven that love could grow anywhere if it was tended with care and nurtured with devotion. The story of Asher and Penelope became more than just family history. It became a legend, a tale told throughout Nevada and beyond. Writers came to interview family members, hoping to capture the magic of that improbable beginning. Artists painted scenes from their life together. And always, always, people remembered the core of the story: a man who saw someone in pain and decided to help, and a woman who was brave enough to accept that help and see where it led. Their great-great-grandchildren, living in a world that Asher and Penelope could never have imagined, still felt the impact of their love, still made decisions based on the values those two had instilled in their family, still believed that taking risks on people could lead to the greatest rewards, still understood that true partnership meant facing everything together, the triumphs and the disasters, with equal determination and mutual support. The ranch continued, as it would for generations to come. The land that Asher had bought as a single man, that he had built on and improved and shared with Penelope, remained a testament to what two people could create when they committed to each other fully. It was more than just property or business. It was proof that love could literally change the landscape, could turn wild land into a home, could create a legacy that would outlast any individual life. And so, more than a century after a cowboy walked into a church and said 5 words that changed everything, the story endured. Because it was not just about one couple or one moment or one decision. It was about the universal human need for connection, for love, for someone to stand beside us when everything falls apart. It was about hope and second chances, and the beautiful, terrible courage it takes to trust again after being hurt. It was, quite simply, a love story for the ages. Born in the Wild West, forged in hard work and honest communication, strengthened by years of standing together against whatever life threw at them. The kind of love that people dream about but rarely find deep and true and lasting, transforming everyone it touched. And it all started because a stranger said, "I will stand there instead." Those 5 words became the Price family motto, carved over the entrance to the ranch house, embroidered on the family quilt, taught to every new generation. They were a reminder that sometimes the most important thing you can do is stand beside someone who needs you, even if they are a stranger, even if it makes no sense, even if it changes your entire life. Because that is what love is: standing there, being present, choosing someone and then choosing them again every single day. That is what Asher and Penelope did for each other for more than 50 years. And the ripples of that choice spread out through generations, touching countless lives, inspiring countless others to be brave enough to take their own risks on unlikely love. The sun continued to set over the ranch every evening, painting the sky in glorious colors that Asher and Penelope had watched together for so many years. The stars came out, bright and endless in the Nevada sky, witnessing the continuation of a story that had begun in heartbreak and grown into something beautiful. And if you listened very carefully on those quiet evenings, if you sat in those chairs on the porch and opened your heart, you might hear it the whisper of a love that refused to be forgotten, that lived on in the land and the family and the story that would never die. "I will stand there instead," the wind seemed to say. And somewhere, beyond the stars and the sunset and the passage of time, 2 souls stood together still, hand in hand, watching over the legacy they had created. Happy, complete, forever.